It's about the death of 18-year-old Nolan Wells during a July 4th boat trip with friends. The sheriff is asking for help and pleading for patience.
I think it's important that we don't put ourselves on a timetable and that we don't rush ourselves. But I do think it's important to be diligent in gathering all the facts. That's what the family deserves.
Wells never returned from a remote barrier island off the Mississippi Gulf Coast.
The very thing that makes Horn Island such an idyllic spot to hang out for the day is what makes the case tricky for investigators. There's nothing here. There are no phones, there are no cameras, there's no police. It's why authorities have asked anyone who was here July 4th with Nolan Wells to come forward.
Even if you may think that it might be insignificant, every little bit helps. And that may be a bigger contribution than you think to this case. Exactly.
A close friend of Wells, Trayston Shepard, says the group spent the day swimming and drinking.
Well, we were just having fun all day, and then as the day went on, people started to drink more and people started to get more drunk.
We asked the sheriff whether drinking or drugs played a role in Wells's death.
Of course, the rumors are out there, but we don't respond to rumors. We respond to facts.
And as investigators attempt to build a full timeline of the teen's movements and whereabouts that weekend, this photo showing Wells at a pool party has been circulating widely online and has been shared by his family's attorney. ABC News confirming it was taken a week before he visited Horn Island. Authorities initially suspect Wells drowned, although the results of autopsies by both officials and the one the family ordered are pending. On our visit to the island, we heard from a local boat captain about how the scenic haven could quickly turn treacherous.
Down there at the end of the west end of the island, yeah, there's a current that can, get you really quick, and it gets deep.
So if you're an experienced swimmer, even that area of the island could be a little dodgy?
Yes, especially with the current down there at the very end. It kind of eddies. If you're out there trying to swim that deep, yeah.
Parents are now planning a funeral for their son, which his mother, Christine, posted overnight, guys. Does not feel real. She said all of her emotions are running together, and her post concluded, "We miss you so much, Nolan." It looks like that funeral is going to be early next week at one of the big convention centers here. Guys.
And Aaron, is there any indication when the coroner's report will be made available, which could shed?
And there's a lot riding on that coroner's report, but there's no telling when it's going to be made public. There were no obvious signs of trauma that investigators saw right away. That's why they've suspected that he drowned, but they still aren't sure exactly why or what led up to that death. And that's why they're counting on the medical examiner's report, the toxicology report, and the independent autopsy that the family is demanding.
Yeah. Need those questions answered. All right. Our thanks to you for being.
Every major investigation has a moment when rumors begin giving way to documented facts. For the Nolan Wells case, many believe that moment may have finally arrived. For weeks, the questions seemed endless. Why hadn't the people closest to Nolan during his final known hours been formally interviewed? Why was federal law enforcement involved? Why did witness accounts appear to differ? And why did every new development seem to raise even more uncertainty instead of providing answers? Now investigators have confirmed one of the biggest developments since Nolan disappeared. All three of the young men who were with him on the boat that day have officially been interviewed. Investigators have also revealed that more than 60 witnesses have now been questioned. At the same time, the FBI has publicly confirmed why it became involved in the investigation, putting an end to weeks of speculation surrounding its role. But even with those answers, the biggest mystery remains exactly where it has always been. What happened during Nolan Wells' final moments on Horn Island? Because when every interview is compared, when every witness statement is placed beside GPS records, when every timeline is tested against digital evidence, one unanswered question continues to refuse to disappear. And before this documentary is over, you'll understand why investigators may actually know far more today than they did just days ago, even if they aren't ready to say it publicly. Because sometimes, the biggest breakthrough isn't discovering new evidence. It's discovering which stories can no longer exist alongside the evidence that already does. Before we continue, if you appreciate carefully researched true crime investigations that separate confirmed facts from online speculation, take a second to subscribe. Every subscription helps us continue covering complex cases with accuracy, patience, and respect for the families still searching for answers. And if you choose not to subscribe, there's a good chance you'll miss the updates that could eventually explain how this investigation reaches its conclusion. Nolan Wells was only 18 years old. By every account from those who knew him, he was athletic, ambitious, and excited about the future. The 4th of July should have been another summer memory. Instead, it became the beginning of one of the most closely watched investigations in Mississippi. What initially appeared to be a missing person case quickly transformed into something much larger. Questions spread across social media. Legal analysts began examining every public statement. Independent experts weighed in on investigative procedures. National media outlets picked up the story. Civil rights attorneys became involved. Eventually, even federal authorities entered the conversation. But despite the growing attention, investigators faced the same challenge they had from the beginning: reconstructing a single afternoon where dozens of people were present. Yet no one could definitively explain exactly what happened during Nolan's final confirmed moments. That challenge became even more complicated because almost immediately, two separate narratives began developing. One was being built by official investigators. The other was being built online. Those two versions of the story didn't always move at the same speed. Online discussions often raced ahead, filling unanswered questions with assumptions. Investigators, meanwhile, continued collecting interviews, reviewing evidence, and following procedures that rarely produce immediate public answers. That difference created frustration. For Nolan's family, every day without answers felt unbearable. For the public, silence often looked like inactivity. But investigations don't usually unfold in dramatic breakthroughs. More often, they advance one interview, one document, one witness, one contradiction at a time. And that's exactly where this story begins to change. Because one criticism had followed investigators almost from the very beginning. It became so common that many people started repeating it as though it represented the entire investigation. The criticism was simple. The three young men who were with Nolan during his final known hours had reportedly not been formally interviewed. Legal commentators questioned it. Supporters of the family questioned it. Even attorneys connected to the case publicly raised concerns about what they viewed as a significant investigative gap. If true, it would have been difficult for many people to understand. After all, the people present during someone's final known hours are typically among the earliest individuals investigators want to speak with. That criticism continued growing, until officials finally addressed it directly. And what investigators confirmed next immediately changed one of the biggest conversations surrounding this case. The confirmation came directly from the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. Sheriff John Ledbetter confirmed that investigators have now interviewed all three of the young men who were on the boat with Nolan that day. For many people following this case, that announcement represented far more than another routine update. It answered one of the most persistent questions surrounding the investigation, but it also created an entirely new one. What did those interviews reveal? Authorities aren't saying, at least not yet. And that's exactly how investigations like this often work. Witnesses aren't interviewed for public consumption. They're interviewed so investigators can compare every statement against evidence that already exists, and against evidence still being collected. A witness account is rarely viewed in isolation. Instead, investigators begin looking for consistency. Does one timeline match another? Do independent witnesses describe the same sequence of events? Does physical evidence support what people remember? Or does something fail to line up? Those comparisons often matter far more than any single interview on its own, because sometimes people remember events differently. Sometimes memories fade. Sometimes stress changes perception. And occasionally, one version of events simply doesn't fit the objective evidence. That's why experienced investigators rarely rush toward conclusions after conducting interviews. They compare. They verify. Then they compare again. And according to investigators, there are now many more accounts to compare than most people realize. Because officials confirmed something else that quietly changed the scale of this investigation. It wasn't 3 interviews, or 10, or even 20. Investigators say they've now interviewed more than 60 witnesses connected to the case. 60. That number immediately changes the way this investigation should be viewed. It suggests detectives have expanded well beyond Nolan's immediate group of friends. They're speaking with people who may have been boating nearby, visitors who spent the holiday on Horn Island, individuals who may have seen boats entering or leaving, anyone whose observations could help reconstruct that afternoon. That approach is important because major investigations are rarely solved by a single dramatic revelation. They're built through accumulation. One witness notices something another missed. One timeline confirms another. One photograph verifies where a boat was located. A digital record establishes a time. Another witness independently recalls the same event. Piece by piece, investigators begin assembling a picture that becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. It's much like completing a puzzle without knowing what the finished image looks like. Each new piece seems insignificant by itself. But eventually, the larger picture starts appearing. And once enough pieces fit together, the remaining gaps often become easier to identify. That's where this investigation appears to be heading. Not toward one explosive announcement, but toward a steadily growing body of evidence built from dozens of independent sources. Still, one important question remained unanswered. Why had the FBI become involved? For weeks, speculation spread across social media. Some believed federal investigators must have uncovered evidence pointing toward a much larger criminal investigation. Others suggested the opposite. Some wondered whether the FBI's presence meant authorities lacked confidence in local investigators. The theories multiplied, but confirmed information remained limited, until the FBI addressed the issue publicly. In a statement provided to a national news organization, the Bureau confirmed its role involved addressing interstate threats made against individuals connected to the case. That clarification immediately narrowed weeks of speculation. It also highlighted an unfortunate reality. As public attention intensified, so did hostility directed toward people associated with the investigation. Threats had reportedly reached multiple families, not just one. Individuals connected to different sides of the case described receiving intimidating messages. According to public reporting, those threats extended beyond Nolan's immediate family. People connected through friendship, through family, even through circumstance. Found themselves facing unwanted attention. It's an important distinction. Threats against individuals are separate from determining what happened to Nolan. They do not establish guilt. They do not answer investigative questions. But they do create another criminal issue that law enforcement must address while attempting to solve the original case. That balancing act is never easy. Investigators must continue gathering evidence, while simultaneously protecting people who have become targets simply because of their connection to an ongoing investigation. The FBI's statement also helped explain something many viewers may not have realized. Horn Island sits within federally managed land. That means cooperation between local authorities and federal agencies isn't unusual when incidents occur there. Understanding jurisdiction matters, because once that context became public, one of the biggest assumptions surrounding federal involvement suddenly appeared much less mysterious. But if the FBI clarification answered one major question, another development raised an even more significant one. Investigators now had more than 60 witness statements. They had interviewed the three friends. They had GPS information, digital evidence, publicly available timelines. Yet one contradiction still remained unresolved. And that contradiction centered on the final conversation Nolan was known to have before he disappeared. What one witness believed happened next did not completely match what others had described. That single difference may prove far more important than many people initially realized. The contradiction wasn't immediately obvious. In fact, for days it existed beneath the surface of the public conversation, overshadowed by larger debates about timelines, investigative procedures, and speculation online. But as more information emerged, investigators and the public began focusing on one simple question. Where did Nolan intend to go after speaking with the young woman he had reportedly met on Horn Island? At first glance, it may sound like a small detail. In reality, it could become one of the most important moments in the entire timeline. According to reporting, the young woman later spoke directly with Nolan's mother about that final interaction. Her understanding was that Nolan planned to return to his friend's boat. But there's an important distinction that often gets lost when people summarize her account. She reportedly understood that was his intention. She did not say she personally watched him board the boat. That difference matters, because intention and observation are not the same thing. Someone can say they're going somewhere and never actually arrive. Investigators know that, which is why witness statements are rarely treated as final answers on their own. Instead, they become pieces that must fit alongside every other piece of evidence. Meanwhile, previous public accounts from Nolan's friends described the situation differently. Those differences quickly became one of the most discussed aspects of the investigation. But before anyone rushes to conclusions, it's important to remember something. Different recollections do not automatically mean someone is lying. People experience stressful events differently. They remember conversations differently. They fill gaps in memory without realizing it. Investigators understand this. That's why they don't simply ask what happened once. They ask again. They compare. They revisit details. And they measure every account against objective evidence. Which brings us to something that cannot be influenced by memory: digital records. Unlike eyewitness recollections, GPS data doesn't forget. Timestamps don't become emotional. Electronic records simply document movement. That makes them incredibly valuable. Earlier in the investigation, portions of the boat's GPS history became publicly discussed. Those records established a sequence of travel that investigators could compare against witness timelines. Not because GPS explains everything. It doesn't. But because it provides fixed points in time. Where was the boat? When did it leave? When did it arrive? Those are questions technology can often answer with remarkable precision. And once investigators know those answers, every witness statement can be examined against them. That's where this investigation may have entered an entirely different phase. Because forensic experts following the case have pointed out something especially significant. The friends reportedly provided their accounts before GPS information became widely known publicly. That timing is important. If someone's recollection matches objective data collected independently, it can strengthen confidence in that account. If details don't align, investigators naturally begin asking additional questions, not necessarily because they've uncovered wrongdoing, but because inconsistencies deserve explanation. Sometimes the explanation is completely innocent. Human memory is imperfect, especially during stressful situations. Other times, an inconsistency becomes the first clue that leads investigators somewhere unexpected. At this stage, authorities have not publicly released the contents of those interviews, nor have they announced any conclusions based on comparing witness statements with digital evidence. That silence has frustrated many observers, but it's also entirely consistent with an active investigation. Experienced detectives rarely reveal exactly what evidence they possess while they're still interviewing witnesses. Doing so risks influencing future testimony. Instead, they allow each person to provide their version independently. Only afterward do they begin identifying where accounts overlap and where they don't. The more than 60 interviews investigators have now conducted make that process considerably more powerful. Instead of comparing only 2 or 3 narratives, authorities can examine dozens: independent witnesses, boaters, visitors, people with no relationship to one another. If several unrelated individuals describe similar observations, those consistencies can become extremely valuable. Conversely, if one version of events stands alone against numerous independent accounts, investigators will naturally want to understand why. And that's where another unanswered piece of evidence enters the picture. A piece many believe could reshape everything. Nolan's phone. For weeks, the device has remained one of the most anticipated sources of potential evidence in the entire investigation. Not because anyone knows what it contains, but because nobody does. And sometimes, the unknown becomes just as important as the known. What investigators eventually discover, or don't discover, on that phone may answer questions that witness interviews alone never could. Or, it could create entirely new ones. One piece of evidence continues to sit at the center of nearly every conversation surrounding this case: Nolan's phone. For weeks, the device has remained one of the most anticipated sources of potential evidence in the entire investigation. Not because anyone knows what it contains, but because nobody does. And sometimes, the unknown becomes just as important as the known. Public reporting indicates that investigators and representatives of Nolan's family agreed that the phone would be examined jointly. That detail matters. A joint examination can help build confidence that any findings are documented transparently and reviewed by both sides. As of the latest confirmed reporting, that examination had not yet been completed publicly. So the questions remain. Could the phone confirm Nolan's final communications? Could location information narrow the timeline? Could photographs, messages, or app activity clarify where he intended to go? Or, will the phone simply reinforce what investigators already know? No one can answer those questions yet, and that's precisely why so many people continue watching this investigation so closely. Because in today's world, our phones often become silent witnesses. They don't speculate. They don't forget. They simply preserve moments. Whether those moments ultimately answer the central mystery is something only investigators, and eventually the evidence itself, will determine. But the phone isn't the only unanswered piece. 2 autopsy examinations have also been closely watched throughout this investigation. Those medical findings may eventually provide critical information about how Nolan died. Until those results are officially released, however, any conclusion about the cause or manner of death would be premature. That's an important reminder in a case where speculation has often moved faster than verified facts. Throughout this investigation, one lesson has become increasingly clear. Facts tend to arrive slowly. Speculation arrives instantly. The challenge is resisting the temptation to confuse one for the other. That may be easier said than done. This case has generated enormous public interest. Families have spoken publicly. Attorneys have raised concerns. Experts have analyzed investigative procedures. Social media has debated nearly every development. Yet despite all of that attention, the official investigation has continued moving at its own pace, interviewing witnesses, reviewing digital evidence, examining physical evidence, following every lead investigators believe deserves attention. It may not satisfy those hoping for immediate answers, but it's often how complex investigations unfold, one documented fact at a time. Looking back over everything that's changed, it's remarkable how different this investigation appears today compared to just a short time ago. Early discussions were dominated by unanswered questions. Had the friends been interviewed? Was the FBI involved? How many witnesses had actually spoken with investigators? What legal process would follow? Today, several of those questions have official answers. The 3 friends have now been interviewed. More than 60 witnesses have reportedly spoken with investigators. The FBI has publicly confirmed its role regarding interstate threats connected to individuals in the case. Officials have clarified aspects of the legal process moving forward. Those developments don't solve the mystery, but they do represent measurable progress. The investigation now rests on a much broader foundation than it did in its earliest days. Instead of relying primarily on second-hand accounts and public speculation, investigators are building from documented interviews, digital records, forensic analysis, and evidence gathered over time. Whether that process ultimately leads to a clear explanation remains unknown. History reminds us that some investigations reach definitive conclusions. Others leave questions that linger for years. It's simply too early to know which path this case will follow. What is certain is that every verified development brings investigators one step closer to understanding what happened on Horn Island. And for Nolan's family, that's what matters most. Not internet theories, not viral headlines, but truthful, evidence-based answers. As this investigation continues, there are still several key developments many people will be watching closely. The joint examination of Nolan's phone, the release of the pending medical findings, any additional information investigators choose to share following the witness interviews, and whether prosecutors eventually announce any further legal action based on the evidence collected. Each of those milestones has the potential to reshape public understanding of the case, or they may simply reinforce what investigators already suspect. For now, patience remains one of the hardest parts of following a case like this. Every day without new information invites more speculation. Every unanswered question encourages another theory. But ultimately, the evidence, not the loudest voices, will determine where this investigation leads. And that's exactly why this story continues to matter. Not because of rumors, not because of online debates, but because an 18-year-old lost his life under circumstances that remain under active investigation. His family continues searching for answers. His community continues remembering him. And investigators continue working to establish the facts. Before we close, we'd like to hear your thoughts. Based only on the officially confirmed information available today, what part of this investigation do you believe will prove most significant? Will it be the witness interviews, the digital evidence, the pending forensic findings, or something investigators haven't revealed publicly yet? Share your perspective respectfully in the comments below. Thoughtful discussion often highlights questions worth considering, while remembering that this remains an active investigation, and everyone involved deserves fairness until the facts are fully established. If you've found value in factual, carefully researched updates like this one, we'd truly appreciate your support by leaving a like on this video. It helps more people discover balanced coverage instead of misinformation, and it allows us to continue following important cases as new verified developments emerge. And if you're new here, consider subscribing and turning on notifications. We'll continue monitoring every confirmed update in the Nolan Wells investigation and bring you new information only after it's been verified through credible reporting and official sources. For now, one question still remains. With more than 60 witnesses interviewed, the three friends now formally questioned, federal authorities clarifying their role, and investigators continuing to analyze every available piece of evidence. Will the next breakthrough finally explain what happened during Nolan Wells' final moments? Or is the most important piece of this puzzle still waiting to be discovered? Until that answer arrives, the investigation continues.